in 1979. I got deported by my parents.
To Nigeria?
Yeah, back to Nigeria. We decided to go to lunch with my friends, and we were climbing on the back gardens. And next thing, I had a gun pulled up on me by the police, literally just crossing a garden. I think the last thing I remembered was being in court, and my uncle, he represented, say, look, Your Honour, his mum's decided to send him back home to his father. I think for me that was a blessing. I then went back to Nigeria in 1979. And the good things that came out of it, I got to meet my great-grandmothers. I got to meet my grandmothers, and I got to understand the culture of where I was from. But I think more importantly, I also understood community.
Wow.
So, for example, when people say it takes a village to raise a child, I always say that I am that child that was raised in the village.
Echoes of our community.
Hello, this is Echoes of Our Community, and I want to say welcome back again. You know, this is a platform where we look at topics and subjects that impact on us as a community, on our well-being. It's a place where we tell our stories. We make ourselves vulnerable. We want to be real. We don't want to just like touch the edges or the surfaces and say, you know, and pretend to our hearers. We want to make it as real as possible. And that's why I count it a privilege to bring people on this platform that tell their stories, so that you that think that you know it or you need the help with it, you can hear from the real people. So today I have somebody with me today. I'm going to introduce him, but you need to know me first. I'm Margaret Taribo. I'm your host, and I'd like you to share, subscribe, and like. Please bring out your comments. Please be real as possible, and enjoy the conversations as we go along. So today I have somebody here, and today we're focusing on what does it mean to be a community enabler? What are the challenges? We're going to hear his story, and what does it mean? Because sometimes we might be expecting too much, and we might be expecting, oh, why you're not helping me, you're not enabling me. But what does it actually mean? And what role do we have to play in making sure that we are doing what we need to do? We don't feel such a sense of entitlement that we're left becoming, you know, reliant on people that are also human. So today I want you to join me to welcome Nicholas. So welcome, Nicholas.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I think, you know, it's been a while that we've been wanting to have this conversation. So it's good to have you.
Thank you.
And I know you, Nicholas, but my viewers don't. So I just want you to tell us your story. Where were you born? Were you here? What took you to where you are now?
Okay. My dad came over here. My mum and dad came over. No, my dad came in the early 60s, and my mum followed in 66, which was the same year that I was born. Grew up originally my dad bought a house in the 60s in Vauxhall, and then we moved to Streatham, and then from Streatham we moved to Cold Harbour Lane. And then in 1979, I got deported by my parents.
To Nigeria?
Yeah, back to Nigeria. I think for those of you who know, you had the SUS laws at the time. It was only the other day it clicked to me. It was over the SUS laws that I actually got sent back. Because during the strike, I think 1978, when all the dinner ladies went on strike, we decided to go to lunch with my friends, and we were climbing on the back gardens. And next thing, I had a gun pulled up on me by the police, you know, literally just crossing a garden. I just remember, you know, I think the last thing I remembered was being in court. And my uncle, may his soul rest in peace, his name was Nicholas Ezechia, or shall I say Barrister Nicholas Ezechia. He represented, say, look, Your Honour, his mum's decided to send him back home to his father. I think for me that was a blessing. I then went back to Nigeria in 1979.
No, but you know, Nicholas, a gun was pulled on you for what? For walking the garden. That's what. There are worse crimes that are happening now.
Well, that's all it was.
Wow.
I think for me, I mean, I was only 11 at the time, so there was not that much mischief I could get up to, really. And also, my friend who was with me was not charged, so I'll leave you to decide. Hence the reason why I said it was part of the SUS law.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think it was a blessing. I think it was a blessing in terms of sending me home. I think the good things that came out of it, I got to meet my great grandmothers. I got to meet my grandmothers, you know, and I got to understand the culture of where I was from. But I think more importantly, I also understood community.
Wow.
So, for example, when people say it takes a village to raise a child, I always say that I am that child that was raised in the village, because I think people bandy that phrase around quite easily.
They do.
And sometimes you have to actually live it. And I lived it, you know, with me and my friends, you know, with some of my friends. I mean, I actually grew up in the village. I didn't grow up in like Abuja or
Lagos. Where do you
I
grow
didn't even grow up in Lagos. I grew up in Delta State or Bendel State.
Yeah.
A town called Ogwashuku.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I grew up there. You know, I think by the time I was 13, I got sent to boarding school, didn't like it.
You're not going to like it. Definitely not.
Well, I think the reason why I didn't like it was because, you know, coming from England, everybody always stole my rations.
You must have been gentle, yes.
Yeah. You know, I got called all kind of nicknames, you know. But in a way, that toughened me up. And I was also called Festos's egg. So my prefect at the time protected me from everybody. I remember people saying, yes, it's Festos's last year. And, you know, big thank you to Festos. So he literally protected me the 2 years in the school, which was St. Anthony's, which was also called Ekumeku. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who don't know about Ekumeku, go and look up the Ekumeku warriors who defended the Igbo lands before the English came and invaded, before they decided to create Nigeria. We were the Ekumeku warriors that were the ones that actually held the British at bay. So maybe I think a bit of my stubbornness comes from them as well.
Maybe, yeah.
So I went to school at Ekumeku, which is also known as St. Anthony's, where I studied. It was funny because I think I did my second and third year there. And I remember third year, I remember choosing my subjects. You know, I wanted to do arts, religious education. Religious education,
yeah.
Fine art,
yeah.
RE, and literature.
Yeah.
And I turned up at the class. And they said, you're in the wrong class. I'm like, no, this is the class that I chose. I said, no, your dad paid. And your dad said you're doing physics, chemistry, and biology. You know, typical Nigerian story. Everybody wants to become a lawyer,
a doctor,
you know, or an accountant. So I think that third year I decided, because Festos was leaving and people had threatened me, like, once he goes, I'm in trouble. I said to I've never ever stood up to my dad. And that was the first time I stood up to my dad and said, I'm not going. So I got transferred to the local school. My dad was a politician in Nigeria. So he was head of the local government. And I think, like I said, going back, it taught me a lot. You know, used to go to farm with my friends. We'd create farms, you know, plant cassava, watermelons, and we'd grow, sell, you know. And then also at times, you know, one person, their mum would sell fish. This one's mum will sell tomato. Another, you know, I'd probably go to my house and pick up the rice. And we had this abandoned house that we all used to sit and cook our food in. But I think for me, what that taught me about peer groups in our culture. You know, because, you know, everybody has their own peer groups. You know, I do still keep in contact with them till today. But like I said, I think that gave me a really good grounding in terms of who I am.
Yes. And
where I'm from. You know, I think most people don't realize that I'm also bilingual as well. So I actually speak my language. And I speak it quite fluently, and something I'm quite proud of as well.
Yeah, but yeah, anybody listening to you will think you're so British. It's like,
well, they call me the Englishman that speaks Igbo. On your channel, Swibu.
Wow.
You see, so, and you know, I think, you know, coming back, I ended up studying biochemistry. I actually wanted to run away from the whole science, but I didn't realize I'd done so many years because I'd done my WAEC and I did my JAM in Nigeria. And then when I came over here, I was told to repeat I think it was O-levels at the time.
Yeah.
That was in Norwood. And it was funny because when I went to school in Norwood, as your previous guest Stephen said, he went to Hillmead. I used to actually live outside Hillmead School, just off Cold Harbour Lane on Somerleyton Estate.
Wow.
So it's an area that's quite familiar with me. And then from college, I just, I think, so I ended up studying doing a diploma in biochemistry. And that was on Tooley Street.
Yeah. Before they actually built the council, the council buildings.
Exactly.
Wow.
So we're talking 1988, 89.
Because the council buildings were actually on Sumner Road. That's where
So, and it's funny because I think sometimes when people, when I'm talking to council officers, I always use it as an excuse of what Tooley Street actually looked like at the time. And I think unbeknown to us, we didn't really understand what regeneration was. And they were actually running it down, to then buy it up and then do it up. So I think for me, when people start saying to me that a place is dilapidated, especially if you're a council officer, I would tell you it's something that you've created. And I think for me, that's where a lot of the work that I do kind of stems from, just making sure that people are not left out. So, I think, when was it, 93, when I had my daughter, a friend of mine bought a place in Peckham, and that's how I've ended up in Peckham. So I moved into his house at the time. At the time, I was DJing, I'd set up my own record company. I was doing music and distribution, trying to organise events. And then I realised that music wasn't really going to pay the bills. And I think because I'd been selling records for quite a while, a friend of mine said, look, since you're good at selling records and you studied biochemistry, why don't you sell drugs to hospitals and doctors and stuff? For some reason, I'll be honest, for some reason, I felt kind of intimidated, talking to doctors. Don't know what reason that was, but, I think the person showed a lot of tough love. I remember every Wednesday, they tell me to go and get my coins. And then on the Thursday morning, I'd go out and get I think it was the Daily Times at the time. I think it was called I think it was the Daily Times. And it used to have all the medical sales jobs in there.
Okay.
And I was told, don't come back until you've got an interview. Yeah. So I used to go down to the phone, even though we had a phone in the house, I had to go down to the phone box and keep calling. And I think, my determination, was that I was going to do it. I didn't find the job in time. So I decided to go and work for double glazing company. And I did that probably for about 2 years. I then went to work for Volkswagen and Skoda. At the time, Volkswagen had bought Skoda, so we were working on the campaign for Skoda. Did that in Hackbridge, in their marketing department. And then I think one Christmas I just said, that's it. I'm done. This is not my job. And I think that caused a bit of an issue with me and my dad at the time, because he said, well, why are you leaving when you got such a good job? And I said to him,
it's about the money for him, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I think I got to a point that I kind of knew, I think internally I knew what I wanted, but I couldn't express it. And I wanted a better job, with a few more perks, like a car. And I was determined that I was going to get a job with a car. I think having sold double glazing and kind of built up a team where I ended up supervising 2 teams, that kind of gave me the determination in terms of how to actually work with people, achieve my goals. And I think for me, it was really good. And I think from that double glazing job, I then got into the medical sales job, and I ended up getting a contract working in Kent for 6 months part-time. And that was a really good experience, because I think it was funny. I think when I went for the job, it was working and selling pharmaceuticals to doctors. And I remember the company I went to work for, it was called UCB Pharma. And it was UCB Pharma. And I remember them saying to me, why should we give you the job? I remember saying to the lady, because I'm black.
Oh, Nicholas, typical you.
And she said, how do you work that one out? And I said, I'm working in Kent. If I make one mistake, everybody's going to know it's me.
Okay.
And I said, I can't afford to make that mistake. And, we parted ways. And by the time I got home, I got a phone call, and I started the job. And it was something that I enjoyed, talking to doctors. I think the benefit that I had was, a lot of the doctors came over from Uganda. So there was that natural affiliation as a Nigerian and as Asian doctors coming over from Uganda. There was that affiliation, like, yes, we're all one. So I think it actually made my job a lot easier. And I think the funny thing was that all the previous jobs that I went to that turned me down, what had happened was when I got the job, because there was that relationship with me and the Ugandan doctors, I could just turn up, be there 5 minutes, and they'll be like, oh, Nicholas, you're here, and they'll let me straight in. So I did that probably for a good 15 years. And then I went for a job with Abbott Pharmaceuticals. I had a friend who was a pharmacist up in Guildford, and he said to me, look, my sister works for this pharmaceutical company. They're looking for reps. So I went for the job and did the interview and phoned up a few days later to find out how the job went. And she said I didn't get the job, but she said what did strike me was that when you spoke about some of the stuff that you did in the community, that your eyes seemed to brighten up. And I was like,
wow,
I don't recall. And I think, me and my stubborn self, I was like, maybe I should give it a go. But I think at that time, so I used to cover quite a large area, literally part of London, most of East Anglia, down to Surrey and Sussex, like doing the different projects that I had. And, I used to come home tired from all the driving, because sometimes, this is just an example, I could go up all the way up to Great Yarmouth just to see one consultant, and you were only allowed to see that one consultant every 6 months.
Wow.
And, the nearest hospital from that would have been, let's say, Essex or somewhere.
It's strange to see that from pharma, because I never saw you as a science. In fact, if not for this, I never saw you as a science person working with pharmaceuticals.
But I think you should realize that I think I read more policies than everybody.
Yes.
And that's where I get it from. So from reading clinical data, I've learned how to extrapolate data from policy such as Summit 2030 and all that kind of stuff, and being able to extract it and then say, look, this is what
and
the council wants
challenge,
to
yes,
do,
yes,
and then challenge.
And so is that what's taking you into being a community?
Yeah. So originally I set up an organization called People Empowering People.
Yeah, that's PEM People.
And it was really about supporting local people to actually create the solutions that were needed. And I think that also came about from working with a young gentleman on my estate, Jason Cameron, who is otherwise known as JJ Revlon, who's quite a successful DJ in Europe. And seeing people like him with immense talents who lived on estates like mine in Peckham, but weren't allowed to achieve things because somebody else was in the way or doing something. And I think for me, it was about giving local people an opportunity to do stuff. I then applied for some funding. I started running bike projects, started running community projects, and also realizing how much power there was in the community. Because I think people don't realize how much power there is in the community. What we don't have is we don't have the right resources.
I like that. There's so much power in the community, but we don't realize how much resources we have. So are you saying there are resources, we just don't know it?
The thing is, people are resources. Okay. So if you look at what I do, I'm always trying to work with local people to do stuff.
Yeah.
And that for me, that's the most important thing. Sometimes I can get resources, whether it's funding from elsewhere, but also it's about building legacy within our community to change things, to build an army that will enable different things to happen. And I think for me, that's always been an important thing in terms of why do we bring people together.
So you think you've been successful over the years with doing that?
Do I need to brag?
You can brag, my
I think I have.
Yeah, I think you have, yeah.
Yeah. And
I think the latest is the Lex 2 building.
Yeah, so Lex 2's opening on March the 6th, fully. It's been a labour of love, but also I think it's also been a challenge.
Yeah.
And I think people don't understand, going from wanting to manage small meanwhile spaces, these meanwhile spaces that you just hold over a period of time, to actually building a space and then managing it. And I think a lot of people don't understand what Lex 2 is. Lex 2 Lives the Exchange 2 is really about.
So I think this is the opportunity for you to explain that, because
Okay. So with Lex 2, we were able to raise about £4 million, not including the land. We raised £4 million to build Lex 2. And I think we were successful in terms of being able to build, not just build it, but, we're going to manage it as well, which I don't think many organizations have actually done, especially coming from a grassroots perspective. But again, I think that stems from a lot of the projects that we've done, from, the Prince Charles visit in 2013, big lunches that we held over Peckham, Southwark Design District that we've created, taken over 65 garages on Old Kent Road. I think a lot of people don't know I was also the first leaseholder for the BMX track in Burgess Park as well. So we've done lots and lots of things. So as I said, we raised £4 million and, we built Lex 2. And I think it's also about seeing some of the issues that are in society and in the local neighborhood. And what I was seeing was that people were getting money and they would do a small job and they'll run off. And as a community, things would always start all over again. And somebody else will come. And I think this is where I think I and many people just don't get on. I'm like, no, we need to keep it local, even if people are going to make mistakes. So a lot of people that I work with, I allow them to make mistakes with us, as long as they don't make it outside. Because once you make that one mistake outside, nobody gives you a second chance. And I think when you look at all the events that we've organized, we've always got local people to host the event for us. And I think even when I look back at, the Prince Charles visit, I think the issues that I had with Southwark Council at the time, I decided not to tell them, but I knew that they have to be involved. And I remember,
because they want to be part of it, isn't it? So.
Yeah, but the question is, they weren't allowing me to be part of what they were doing. So why should I allow them to be part of what I'm doing? And I realized that they had to be part of what we're doing because of security and protocol.
Yeah.
And I remember, one of their members of staff phoning me up and saying, have you invited this person? I went, nope. Have you invited that person? Nope. Oh, what about this person? I went, nope. And she said, but you do know it's protocol. And I remember saying to the person, look, protocol is when I, as a community person, wants to do stuff in the community, I get support before and after Prince Charles comes along. And I'm not getting it. Goodbye. And I put the phone down. We did have, representatives from the council who were there. But I think also it was me being
assertive, I think.
Yeah, assertive, that this is ours and we can do it without you. And I think it ended up being one of the biggest events.
It was big. It was big.
And I think for me, the pride that I had was that it was done by local people, had no council involvement whatsoever, apart from them attending. And it actually
They're not going to
that.
like it, you know that.
Yeah. And for me, but the thing is, it wasn't about whether they liked it or not. I think, since we've done the event, I think for a lot of the people who supported us during that event and were able to do things from taking pictures to organising to visiting, everybody was happy. Even just the people that were just able to just visit and just be in his presence, that made them happy. And I think for me, that's what gave me great joy. So we set up Pen People. We took over 3 shops on Peckham High Street. We also took over 65 garages. And so I got the garages in 2015. And the whole aim was about turning it into a creative space for local residents. It was smack bang on the middle of the Ledbury estate. And for me, it was almost like it was better than nothing. But I was still kind of trying to work out how we were going to do it. We were able to put in an application to start getting work done on it. And then Grenfell happened.
Yeah.
And the council said, look, it won't be a good idea for us to carry on with the garages because eventually they're going to have to end up knocking it down. And it might be good to find a way of finding another place for you. And I was like, okay, fine. So we're talking roughly about 2016, 2017. So I still had the garages up till COVID. I mean, I only just handed back the garages in 2024, early 2025. So what happened in 2020, the council decided to take all the shops off us on Peckham High Street. We had numerous things that were happening in there. It became, I think for me, it was a place that community came and done stuff. The council gave it to us at a really low price. So I was able to just charge people a really low price to come in and use it. And then in 2020, when COVID happened, the council said to me, look, we need to take the building back, which I agreed. They had tried to take it previously due to a tenant that I put in there. I'm not going to mention no names. That caused a lot of problems. And at that time, I just refused. I was not giving it up because if you look at that part of Peckham High Street, economically, it's a bit dead. And I think by us being there, it kind of livened it up. So again, this goes back to reading documentation and understanding what's called local economy. What brings in local economy, what takes out of the local economy. People coming in, spending money, going to one place. So, for example, for me, local economy is people coming to our place, coming to an exhibition, then going off into Peckham for the rest of the night. That is part of local economy.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't take that for granted, that we're bringing people. Then when you look at things like Southwark's Fairer Future for All, it's about giving people the best chance in life, spending money like it's our own, which is one of my favourites, and, providing a great place for people to live, work and visit. So I think for me, the reason why I'm saying this is because I think a lot of the times there's ambitions of what we all want to do.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't align with the alignment of where the council and the institution and the mayor's office
system,
want to go, you're kind of fighting against the grain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Lex 2. So that's how.
So the garages was Lex 1.
Okay.
And, again, we supported a lot of young people who went in there and did stuff. And I think for me, the greatest pride is we didn't have running water, didn't have a proper toilet, place was freezing because it was made out of concrete, but it brought a lot of people together. And I think when I look at a lot of the people that were in those spaces and what they're doing now, it gives me great pride because it's almost like saying, guess what? We've planted the seeds and the legacy is now coming out. And for me, it's not about legacy that, this is what I made happen. It's really about, it's about finding those diamonds in the rough and giving them a place where they can process themselves and become better individuals and deliver things on a much better level.
Wow.
So, that's how Lex 1 was born. And that's going to get knocked down this year. So for me, because I knew it was going to get knocked down, for me, it was important that we keep that legacy going.
And that's how Lex 2 came about.
So Lex 2 is now Lex 2. So when people say, well, why Lex 2? Where's Lex 1? People can explain the story of Lex 1.
Oh, now I understand.
And then people who've been in Lex 1 can say, we was in the original Livesey Exchange. Because I think, from getting, over £4 million from the council, I don't want to forget those who've made us who we are.
Wow, that's true.
So that whole principle about people empowering people is still there.
Okay.
We would not be there without them.
The people.
Those are the ones that worked hard, by the way.
Wow.
So, 2021, we put in an application to build two-story buildings. We've completed the first building in 2023. We're just about to complete the second building.
Those are going to be the community kitchens.
They're going to be community kitchens. So I think one thing people need to understand is that, when we were being given money, I think people were trying to psychologically shape me in terms of what should go in there. And it was a battle with individuals, with institutions. So, for example, people wanted the kitchens to actually be industrial workshops. And my thing is, no, because I had to do, I mean, initially we did a crowdfunder for 56,000. So my thing is, this is about community. It's not about industrial targets that are in the policies. It's about what do we want as a community? What do we need to prosper? Because I already saw things changing on Old Kent Road, and everybody knows that. I've always moaned. Let me not say moan. Moan's not the right word. I've always talked about how different Old Kent Road is going to become once all these student places were going to start coming in. And I think what makes it worse was the projection of student accommodation, which they call PBSAs, which is purpose-built student accommodation, or purpose-built student allocation. It was high, but not as high as what it is now.
Okay.
So now when you look at Old Kent Road, you're looking at 1-bedroom flats at £500,000. But the question is, for a lot of the institutions and people who are delivering projects, I feel that we're not creating opportunities for people to aim towards that £500,000 to live in those places. And we don't really have any choice. When I came to Old Kent Road in 1993, it was considered hard to let. I remember, when I got my keys from Meeting House Lane, where I went to register to be, for a flat. I remember they sent me to my block and they said, "Oh, have a look at this block. Look it through the window. If you don't like it, go and look at all the other flats that are empty. And if you like any of those, you can choose them," because nobody wanted to live around that area, around Peckham, around Old Kent Road. Fast forward, 20, 30 years, and it's become one of the most in-demand places. So for me, knowing that history, I don't want developers and I don't want institutions just coming in, extracting information, and then walking out. I want you to say to people, look, we want to help you. We're going to extract information, but we need you to become self-sustainable as well.
I think that is very key in terms of your role as a community enabler, and I think you've done a very good job of that.
Thank you.
So going forward, and your thoughts to the people and communities and young people, what do you have to say in terms of where are we going from here?
So for me, things are going to get expensive. We can either acknowledge it and keep walking, or acknowledge it and do something about it. And I think for me, Lex 2 is a place where people can come on board, do stuff. I will say, if you're coming on board, don't take it for granted that, maybe just because we might want to help you, you can just sit there and do nothing. Because same way you walk in, same way I'll tell you goodbye. And Lex.
Just to let you know, viewers, we use Lex too, and he's not telling us goodbye. There's nothing he can do about it. But
really?
My young people enjoy it. Yeah.
Do you know what? I think for people who don't understand reason, there's a lot of things. So there's another project that I'm working on, which is Leighton Square.
Yeah.
Which is an adventure playground, which is across the road. So Lex 2 is only meant to be for people over the age of 18.
Yeah.
And I have an affinity with young people in terms of, they're not being given enough support to discover who they are, or they're not given the spaces to be more creative. And I think for me, because we're working on Leighton Squares,
that's our home.
Yeah, the council have already put over £1 million into that. And again, that's another issue, because I remember when I first asked about Leighton Square, I was told it was a statutory service.
Yeah.
And then when the council ran out of money, it became a non-statutory service. But then also trying to open the building became a nightmare as well. So, thank God for people like Scott, Daniel, and a few others who started running the campaign. Then if Rio Ferdinand grew up on that estate, so did Anton Ferdinand. And there was a big get-together, and I think that was used to kind of like amplify the need that Leighton Square needed to be open. So I was approached by the council. I brought in Daniel and another guy called Malcolm, and we set up a group called Friends of Leighton Square. So we've been putting together a proposal to submit to the council in terms of how it can be run. And again, it's really about how do we get local people running it? not just running it, but also understanding how to make it sustainable as well.
Yeah.
Not just for the heart and Leighton Square, but also for them as individuals.
Fantastic.
You know, so the reason, you know, again, the reason why you guys, you know, and other young people that I support at Leighton Square, at Lex too, is because Lex hasn't, Leighton Square hasn't been built yet.
Yeah. So once that is
so
done,
once that's built,
then there will be,
then everybody goes. But also, you know, it's also about making sure that people know what they're doing, so that when they do go in, it doesn't fall apart.
Exactly.
You know, so that's another reason. If anybody's got ideas working with young people, I will always support them and let them use our space during the holidays, you know, to kind of like build that acumen of professionalism, wealth, and projects.
You've got it all together. Thank you so much, Nicholas. So you've heard it, a community enabler indeed. And I don't think it's the end. There's so much to do. And we look forward to the launch in, because
March the 6th.
Well, March the 6th. And I'm so glad that in terms of how we are creating.
And you know, one of your students might be doing our billboards.
Yes, I heard that. I spoke 15-year-old doing their billboard. I'm so excited that we're doing these things and our young people are also involved as well. So Nick, thank you for the opportunities and thank you for all that you do. And I'm looking forward for us to do much more together.
No,
so thank you. So you've heard it now. Community enabling is powerful. And you said something before about, you know, for some people get jobs if they become community enablers. But anyway, that's another conversation for another day. But we look forward to having more time together. And I'll see you next time on Echoes of Our Community. We've heard it all tonight, but we'll hear more. God bless. Take care.
Thank you.
Echoes of our